Hey everybody. I've been talking a lot lately about getting to know yourself, right? If you know yourself, you'll detect faster when somebody's trying to shift that or, you know what I mean, manipulate you into making choices that you wouldn't normally make. If you really know yourself, you'll pick up on that a lot faster. But then you have to ask yourself, too, two more questions. How well do you really know the people around you? And how well do they actually know you? You know, there's a lot of deception and manipulation in the world right now. Um, People can craft these elaborate masks that you will not see through until they're ready for you to, or for a long time at least. Um, some people say they can't wear the mask forever, but they can conceal themselves for quite a while if the conditions are right. Um, you got to ask yourself, like, even though you tell yourself, oh, this person isn't capable of doing that, I wouldn't believe they would do that. Have you been around them every second of their life? Have you seen all the choices they make? Have you heard the thoughts that they entertain? You know, a lot of the reason that I struggle with understanding things is because there's things that people have done to me that I would never do to another human being, friend, enemy, or otherwise. You know, um, some people are just devious and cruel like that. Stay away from those people. They're no good for you. You know? And then the other question is, how well do they know you? Like seriously, if you catch your friends around you saying things that seem like your character, that they say, "Oh, I thought of you," and it's like something that's completely out of your character, whatever scenario they described that made them think of you. You got to ask yourself, okay, is that misconception something that I portrayed the wrong way, or is that something that they perceived the wrong way? Right? It's all about perspective and perception. It really is. Reality is what you make it, right? But you have to pay attention, to those around you because they're doing the same thing at the same time. You know, everybody's trying to navigate and get through things. Some do it with honor and intention. Um, some are greedy and malicious. It's just luck of the draw. You're going to come across the people you're going to come across. Um, but the more you embody your core self, your real authentic self, the more attractive you are to like-minded people. You know, you get a lot of these people that make these little echo chambers. Fill themselves, surround themselves with yes men, and that's not the same as finding your tribe. You don't want somebody that's going to enable you to make poor choices. You know, uh, 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 some of the best dating advice I've heard is women don't let your single friends give you advice on your relationship. And it kind of goes for the guys too, but I've noticed women are a lot more devious about it. Um, but it's true. Misery loves company, so they're going to get you in the same position they're in. And they might even think they're doing you a favor. It might not even be malicious. They might think they're doing, but regardless, they're taking your naivety for granted and manipulating you into doing something that you wouldn't have normally done. And that cost can be very high. Listening to the wrong influence. You know, how many times have I, heard people, that are in some kind of trouble, usually legal, saying, "Oh, I wish I'd never listened to this one, or I wish I'd never done that, or I wish I'd never gone to this place." Be very mindful of the influence you allow around you. If the people around you start making you second guess yourself, start making you act against your standards and morals, examine that. Don't just go along. You don't need to impress these people. You really don't. It is okay to walk away. It is better to walk alone than to walk in the wrong company. The right company will find you. I have proven this. Ever since I've cut ties with the wrong people, it did take a little time, but the right people are starting to come out of the woodworks. I'm starting to make new connections, and it's great, and it is literally changing my life. I'm getting the right influences around me, and not all of that is new people. I reconnected with some old friends that kind of distanced themselves. They didn't like what I had become the last few years because of the influences around me. And now that I am free of those influences, they're more inclined to want to spend more time again. And that was kind of a revelation to find that out. I was surprised when everything first happened, and one of my relatives, asked, what was going on, and I told him, and I said, there's no chance. There's no getting back together. And they were like, good, I like you better this way. Like, they didn't even hold back. They just said it out, and I appreciated that. That honesty. Kind of stung a little, but. And again, now these friendships that were positive, in the past, and you would think, they just distance over time, People move, people, get different jobs, people get different schedules, things happen, Sometimes we get distant. But sometimes it's an active choice. Like, if there's somebody you really want to be connected to, no matter the distance, we live in an age where it's easy to stay in touch. It only takes a few moments, really, to keep in touch with people across the world. It's one of the fantastic things about the technology right now. That is absolutely a blessing. But kind of overwhelms people with options too. But anyway, that's another conversation. But it's interesting because you think when you distance from these people that's it. That's the end of their story in your life, and on to the next chapter. But sometimes it's the influences around you, and once those influences are gone, those connections correct them, come back. They revive themselves. And then they might last, longer than you originally expected. It's all in what you choose to go along with and what you choose to nurture. And by nurture, I mean, if you're in a partnership with somebody, right, a genuine relationship, be it, best friends, a romantic partnership, whatever, but you're a close bond, like you want to show somebody that you really care about them, right? The Bible tells us there is no greater love than to lay your life down for your friend. And that does not mean, literally standing in front of them and taking a shot for them, although that is included. What it means is, would you put your pride and ego aside? If you met somebody that was so fantastic, so wonderful, you thought so highly of, would you put your pride and ego aside to follow them? Because that's, what the Bible wants us to do with Jesus Christ. It wants us to emulate, to be Christ-like. That's what being a Christian means. And a lot of people want the title, but they don't put in the work. And that's one of the things that has hurt it over times. People taking on the mantle, but not talking the talk, but not walking the walk. It's not an easy walk to make. It's not. It's not for everybody. I wish it was. That some people just aren't capable for whatever reason. They just choose. And hey, that's free will. That's the gift they get. You get to choose for yourself. You know, one thing I'm thankful for is that I'm starting to really come back into myself again. You know, the person that I was building myself into the last few years and the last few months kind of did a setback. Well, the other day I got some, not so great news from a friend, and they needed words of encouragement. And the old me, shone through. And I was able to, give them some, for lack of a better word, motivation, although that's not quite right. They're already motivated. But again, the oomph, that little kick in the pants to step it up. And I couldn't have done that if I was still in that wallowing stage that I had been in. So I'm grateful for that, because that kind of snapped me out of it. I just think it's horrible, the circumstances around it. But the fact that it was effective, that I was able to, excuse me, that I was able to pull that out of myself. I had been out of touch with that part of me for so long. It was nice to know that I could tap back into it, as needed, to help a genuine friend, somebody who cares. And that goes back to, circling back to what I was originally talking about. How well do you know the people around you, and how well do the people around you know you? Right? And that is not necessarily meant to spark suspicion. I love that. You should look up on YouTube that speech from Ted Lasso about being curious about, other people. Because that's what those questions are meant. Not to spark suspicion, but to spark curiosity. If you really care about somebody and you think you really know them, you got to question that bond sometimes. You got to question who they really are. And the fact that people change over time. They're capable of it. Sometimes the person you first got to know isn't who you're dealing with anymore. Excuse me. Because they've become somebody else through their life experiences. And that can blindside you, because you put the blinders on, you keep thinking this is the same person that you've always known, and it's not. They're either taking the mask off or becoming something else. And that's fine. Again, free will, The point is to change. Preferably through growth and healing. But realistically, that's not always how people change. It's not always for the better. But again, change only occurs by choice. So if they change for the worse, that was a choice they made. If they change for the better, that is a choice they made. And not everybody, when you decide to change for the better for yourself, not everybody is going to come with you. Some people are afraid to face themselves. Some people are afraid of the growth. And they want to stay back. And hey, that's fine. That's their choice. And then your choice becomes, do you want to break free of that and continue to grow? Or do you want to stunt your own growth to stay in that company? Because that's what it comes down to. It's all about choices. We, again, in my talkings to my friend, I say all the time, every time you open your eyes, you're guaranteed two things: a chance and a choice. And it's up to you what to do with both. And that's about, as real as I can get with you. That's facts. That's how it works. That's life in a nutshell. If you're not happy with where you are, it's because you've been making poor choices. And you need to examine those choices so you can make better ones. This is how change happens. This should not be rocket science. You would think that this would be common knowledge, common understanding, but it is not. I think that's probably the most frightening part of all. Is, how natural is it for us as a species to want to improve? Everybody wants better for themselves. But why do we turn away from the opportunity to make ourselves better? Like, serious, think about that. Ponder that. I say all the time, we've been trained to go against our human nature, and I stick by it. That is a hill I will die on. But people need to open their eyes and look around and start seeing it for real for themselves. We are letting ourselves sink into all right, think of it like, the old school, when we were kids, the quicksand, not the real life quicksand, but the kind you heard about as a kid that you thought was, so dangerous. And I mean, it is dangerous, but not level we were led to believe. But, you start to sink faster and faster. And once you get to a certain point, the sand is around you. It's compacted in around you. Your body can't move right. There is a point of no return. We let ourselves sink too far, and we will get to that point of no return where we can't pull ourselves out. And like I've been saying, nobody's coming to save us. It is our job to save ourselves. That was one of the messages that, Jesus did bring. It is between you and God. Nobody else. You and God. Well, through Jesus, but you get what I'm saying. And in the end, that's the only relationship that really matters. That is the relationship that you want to nurture above all others. And that is something that I had to learn the hard way, because I let that relationship suffer to favor another relationship. And that relationship let me down. It wasn't there when I needed it. God's always there when I need him. I just have to be willing to receive him. People will let you down. Hell, you'll even let yourself down. Same thing. I allowed treatment that I shouldn't have tolerated. And it was for the sake of being accepted. And ironically, others would accept me, but then I could no longer accept myself. So be careful. I'm not saying don't compromise, because you should. You should compromise. You should come together with others. You should meet in the middle. But only when that doesn't go against your core. Who you are at your very center. Don't let somebody change that unless you want it to change. And that's what it really comes down to. You are in control of your own life. You might not be in control of the circumstances around you, but you are in control of how you perceive them, how you react to them, how you move forward past them. Some things are thrown at us to keep us, last video I was talking about staying stuck. Some things are thrown at us to keep us stuck. I am fully convinced that somebody wanted me down in a hole, both literally and figuratively, like so depressed to the point where I wasn't functioning, possibly even to the point where I, wouldn't be around anymore. I am fully convinced of that. That was the goal. Because nobody is that cruel to you without that being the point. But you got to know yourself better. You got to know what you can take. You know, I could sit here and give a million woe is me stories about the rough things I went through in life, but you know what? I'm still standing. And although, you know, some of the things I went through have been painful, they've also been very empowering. They've made me wiser, stronger. Sometimes you have to embrace the bad for the silver lining. You know, so throughout the Bible, God can take what's meant for your harm and make it for your good. And you got to look for it. You got to hunt it down sometimes. You know, so it's very easy to think in that, you know, why me, Lord? Why am I being punished like this? Sometimes it's not a punishment. Sometimes it's a rescue operation. Sometimes it's to pull you out of one situation to get you in a better situation where you should have been had you made the right choices. Now that you're more prepared to make those right choices, it will correct itself. But it only works out if you do the work. It only works if you work it. You know, that is absolute fact. So if you want better for yourself and better out of life, do the work. Ask the questions. Know yourself and know the people around you. Decide what you allow to influence you, and decide what you allow to happen to you. To a degree. Some things we can't control in that area, but other things we can. We get to decide who we choose to spend our time around. If they choose not to treat you right, or if they choose to try and corrupt you, you know, to compromise your morals, you can choose to walk away too. You know, sometimes you can't physically get away from them, but you can tune them out. Whatever it takes, whatever you have to do to protect yourself, who you are, not selfishly, right? But we are created in God's image, and God loves every one of us. We are all unique. That's what He loves about us. You know, we're here to have unique experiences. So when we are done this experience, we can report back, trade notes. Again, something to bring us together, not drive us apart. You know, something that people don't do anymore. The good old days, you know, we'll sit around a computer screen with that glow on us. Nobody sit around a campfire swapping stories like we used to. Call it outdated and old-fashioned, but people got along better when they interacted more. Just because you're talking through a screen is not the same as being present. There is a difference. Take the time. First and foremost, most importantly, know yourself. But once you figure that out, you're not done. You got to figure out what's around you. What could shape you to go in a different direction that you don't want to go? Because then you got to move away from that. You got to either remove it from you or remove yourself from it. Whichever is the easiest or best option is what you got to do. It really is that simple. You know, like I always say, kiss life. Keep it super simple. If it doesn't treat you right, don't let it treat you at all. Get away from it. You decide the ending of your story, right? You don't get to decide what happens to you between the beginning and the end, but you are the author of your own story. All you got to do is be willing to take up the pen, have the courage. Let it flow. Become what you want to be. Again, the best advice I've ever heard is decide what you want out of life. And then say no to anything that doesn't end in that. Again, keep it super simple. It really is that easy. Well, I shouldn't say easy, but it is that simple. Nothing about life is easy. But the simpler you keep it, the happier you'll be in it. I promise. Anyway, I'm way over time. I've been babbling for a bit, but these are things that have been on my mind. I'm grateful that I'm getting myself more together. And I'm coming back to, I'm starting to feel useful again. Instead of being focused on negative things, I'm trying to focus my thoughts on helping again. And that was a much needed shift. And that, again, that happens because of an awareness of who I am, who I currently am, who I want to be in the future, who I am surrounding myself with now, and who I would rather surround myself with in the future. All this is factors that come into play. And I feel confident that I am on the right path right now. I have zero regrets. Despite some of the hurt, that I've been through recently, I really have no regrets. Because so far, everything has proven itself. Yeah, it has its low moments, but overall, it's been a real awakening, a real liberation. I forgot who I was for so long. And I've spent the last couple months falling in love with myself all over again. Being who I meant to be from the beginning before I got distracted. And now I know better to not let myself get distracted again. You want the people in your life that you allow in your life need to complement you, not complicate you. Catch that one? Don't let it go over your head. Keep it simple. If it complicates things, get away from it. But if it's complementary, if it enhances things, if it makes things easier, then you want to cling to it with everything you got and not let it go. Especially now. In the world today, there is a shortage. So if you can find something that's real and solid, cling to it. Try and become that for yourself. Again, that's part of getting to know yourself. You have to be solid in who you are. No matter what comes against you, there are lines that you will not cross. There will answers that will always be the answer that you give. Not because you're stubborn, but again, there's lines that you will not cross. If you do not stand for something, you will fall for anything. Principles, integrity. I know these are foreign concepts to a lot of people. Look them up in the dictionary. Practice them. Be the best version of yourself. Anywho, keep taking care of yourself. Try and take care of others. I'll catch you in the next one.